Round rhythm with the. What's up guys, Grenno here. I've been asked to do a breakdown of my latest tune, Bone Siren. So that's what I'm going to do with you today. Hopefully you'll get some information that you can use in your own projects. So let's dive right in. Okay, so we'll start with the heavy gear first, the kick and the bass. I'll go over the group processing in a minute. So with the bass line, when I had this idea in my head of this track, I always had the idea of it being a bass line driven track, like just bass line all the way through. And what you need to take into account when you choose to do that, like have a bass line all the way through, is you need to be aware of what key it's in. Now, granted, any tune you make, you need to be aware of what key it's in. But when you're having just that one note all the way through the track, it's so important to decide on where about in the frequency spectrum that track is going to hit. That note is going to hit. Because obviously if it's too high up in the frequency spectrum, you just won't get that much of a response out of speakers because it'll be too high and you won't get that low end that you want. But also on the flip side, if it's too low, the speakers will struggle to kind of produce the note that you want because it's too low down. So I chose D because it's, in my own experience, it's a nice middle ground and it proper bangs through speakers. So yeah, that's why the track is in D. Now I'll go to the patch. Okay, so the patch is it's a Serum Patch and it's from a sample pack called Deceiver from Evo Sounds, and it's turn off. Not amazing at sound design, so I tend to avoid it. I tend to just go through sample packs and try and find nice sounds. I've fiddled around with the release and the sustain on this because if you'll notice, the bass line kind of is long, nice long notes, and then there's a part in each beat where it just kind of stops. So I'll try and find where's the drop? Drop. So if you listen to this, so there I really wanted the bass line to just stop abruptly, so I fiddled around with the release to get that kind of sound in the way I wanted it. But other than that, there's not much I've changed to it, to be honest. Then next is a bit of saturation, R bass. This is just basically a mobile phone adapter. This is just to make it sound as good as possible through shit speakers. So this adds a bit of saturation in the high end. The frequency there is 73 Hz, which is around D in the frequency spectrum. So this will resonate at D, which is what I want. After that, there's a utility that I've left on. Oops. And then this is for gain staging, so this just reduces the volume before it goes into a compressor, because with kind of analog emulated software, it's sometimes, if the volume's too high, it will just clip because it's not designed to take in like hot information. Now the reason I put a glue compressor on after the or a compressor on after the saturation is because of, in my own experience, I've noticed when you saturate things, it adds a lot of transients and kind of increases the dynamics of things. And when I'm creating a bass line, I don't want the bass line to bounce around. I want the bass line to just be solid all the way through. So I've added a compressor after the saturator just to tame the dynamics of the bass line a little bit, so it's nice and solid. I think there's only about 3 dB of gain reduction going on there. Yeah, 3 dB. After that is a EQ. Now the EQ here is simple, just cutting off the unwanted stuff below 28. So I think that is just below, yeah. And then just a high pass, or is that a low pass? I always get them mixed up. Low pass, because I don't need any of this information from the bass line because I've got drums, vocals, effects, so don't need any of that. And that's it for the EQ. Then after that is the Lfo Tool, which is the sidechain. I'll go through that in more detail in a minute. Then the high pass is that is just to add kind of a bit of dynamic in between transitions and parts of the song. So if we go through the automation there, just turn it off and on as it's going into different parts of the track. So like every time there's an interest point, I'll just kind of cut the bass a little bit and then drop it back in. Same here, kind of a trick I've picked up from DJing really. and then in the smile. Now, yes, I have reverb on the bass line, but give me a second to explain myself. I only use the endless smile or reverb when it's just about to come into a break or like stop before, and it kind of just adds a bit of kind of interest. It smooths out the bass line quite nicely before dropping back in, but you'll notice that it's not actually on any like important part, it's just on the build-ups. And then the low pass, I can't remember what this is for. Okay, so the low pass is again just for kind of adding interest, so as it builds into the drop. So this interlude, just a tiny bit taken off, not much, just a tiny amount, because like we've already EQ'd it here, so there's not much coming through past 190 anyway, tiny amount, but just kind of another time, like it's very, very, to be fair, probably no one will notice that apart from me, but it's there, so there. The kick is again just a sample from a Vengeance pack, aren't they all? And then that high pass, again similar to the bass, every now and then, let me find the device on, yeah, so every now and then, the same interest, probably the same interest points, yeah, so it's pretty similar to the bass line, where it just cuts out just before something happens, each interest point, just high pass the kick, add a bit of dynamic to the track. Then the low pass is probably doing something similar. Yeah, again, so these are just before the build up, and then on this part of the track just kind of cuts a little bit, because I think this kick has quite a lot going on, if I remember. Yeah, there's a lot going on in the top part of that track. Yeah, so then after that is the Lfo Tool. Now this Lfo Tool isn't actually doing anything, and again I'll go into this in a minute. And then this utility is just slight volume reduction, couple of dB just before the second drop. That's that. Now the kick and the bass with the sidechain, obviously sidechain is incredibly important, but because again this is a bassline driven track, I wanted to make sure that the bassline was, there's as much bassline as possible, and the only way to do that is to just surgically carve out the bass and the kick together so they fit. Now you can use Kickstart, like I use Kickstart quite a lot, but the problem with Kickstart is that there's no, it's not related to the track you're making. It's like 10 presets and that's it. And it's really handy because you throw a Kickstart, or actually for people who don't know what Kickstart is a automated sidechain plugin, which, come on. Okay, so this is Kickstart, and you can see it's so easy, just a percentage, and then it ducks depending on which preset you have. Nice and easy, but again, the problem is it doesn't know anything about the track that you're making. It doesn't know, how long the how long the kick is, doesn't know how heavy the bass line is. So it's very handy for nice, easy side chains, but sometimes you need something a little bit more advanced. And this is kind of a tip that I've kind of found out myself. Now with Lfo Tool, this is from Xfer, there's a button here which allows you to impose the audio wave on for each beat. So this is 1 bar or 1 beat, 4 beats. No, there's 1 beat. And then, so this is the kick, and then down here is the bass. Now this affects the sidechain, or the the volume ducking. And on the kick there is no volume ducking, but I can visually see a really good representation of the kick and what it's doing, and then I can compare this to scale to the bass line. So if I play, just loop the drop here, I'll play this, I can see where the kick ends and where it starts, and kind of the juicy part of the kick. And then on the bass, I can visually see where I need to carve the bass out, and where, more importantly, when I can bring it straight back in. And that way you get the most bass line possible without kind of hindering the kick. And doing it visually is so handy as well. So here I can see that the kick is quite a large transient on the kick here, and then there's kind of another juicy bit, and then it trails a little bit chunky, and then it kind of trails off normally, and by the middle point it's completely gone, which means that the bass line can be completely introduced by that point. So here I've kind of replicated the opposite, where that transient is, the bass line is just on 0, and then as it comes in a little bit, it just slowly brings back into the full volume at the middle when the kick's gone. The advantage of doing this is that you get a fat as fuck bass line, completely tailor-made to the kick and the bass of the actual track, instead of using sidechain that is just kind of like thrown on to any track. So yeah, that's how I got them to hit well. Now with the group processing, there's another trick I found to do with compressing the bass and the kick. Now I've kind of progressed on since doing this track, where I'll add a few more bands for the knock and the kind of click of the bass, but generally basically this is just a bit of low end compression on the bass and the kick together. So this is just kind of squashing them together, and then when it's you get to like a lower part of the track, it kind of yeah, and that's literally just a bit of low end compression on the bass and the kick together to get it sounding really tight. Okay, so with the drums, again, because this track is bassline driven, there's no synth, but you still need to fill the frequency spectrum up with stuff to keep it interesting. So I do that with, amongst other things, I do that with having a lot of drums, a lot of percussion, and I don't usually use percussion loops in most of my tracks because I like to have a lot of control over what's going on with everything. But with this, because I would have just been here forever creating my own bits and bobs to add in, I use a lot of loops for this, and samples. Now the clap is just a basic clap, just I think it's a Vengeance pack. Yep, that's it. Now with the percussion, if I just play it, play the whole thing. Because I've got a lot of percussion going on, it's important that they don't kind of fight over each other or like climb over each other in the mix. So I want a lot of things happening, but you don't want it all happening at the same time, like exactly the same time, because if you have samples on samples on samples and stuff on top of stuff on top of stuff, it just becomes noise and it just doesn't sound very good. So you'll notice that if I open these up, they're not actually playing at the same time at any point. So you got this, 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 then that, then that, then that, then that, then that. So never does a sample open this up as well. No, ignore that one. That's just a shaker. Never does a percussion hit actually hit at the same time at any point. They're all so there's loads going on and there's a lot of samples, but they're all playing just slightly differently, so they're not actually fighting over each other. Now if I go to these percussion loops, these two, they may look identical, but this one, first of all, this looks like there's loads going on, but there isn't, because if I play it, I've actually removed some of the elements that I didn't like. So this clap, I've got my own clap, and I didn't particularly like this one. If I play it, I wasn't a fan of that clap, so I just got rid of it. And again, it would just be fighting over the clap I've got, so there's no point. And then this one looks like a carbon copy of the one above it, but it's not, right? So I have just duplicated this one, but what I've done, again, because it's so important to keep the mix interesting, and there's no synth which kind of occupies that mid-range part of the track, specifically in the drop. I've duplicated this percussion channel, and then I've added some reverb, delay, and then some compression to clean it up. But the reverb and delay, if I just play it, just adds, it's the exact same sample playing, but it's like kind of a delay effect on it. So if I play it, and it's a tiny amount, but it adds to build up the body of the track. So we're playing together, and then turn it off. It's just a tiny amount, but that adds to kind of the flavour of the track and fills up the space. It's very, very important to make sure that this is not getting in the way of anything else. So there is quite a lot of EQ, so nothing below 1200, because you only need this to kind of tickle the ears. Don't need it to kind of drive the track, so just remove all the low. Then the reverb is quite high. The ping pong delay is quite high as well. And then this compressor is to just tame the dynamics a little bit so it doesn't bounce everywhere. And then this LFO tool is the sidechain, and it's heavily sidechained again because you don't want it to get in the way of the kick and the bass or anything important. So yeah, if you just listen to it again. Hey, just get this LFO tool over here. Yeah. So it's just sidechain it so it doesn't get in the way of anything important. Because obviously I want that boo boo, like the heavy bass line, to be the only thing you hear when it's playing. So yeah, that's the percussion. It's just the snares, another shaker. Yeah, sidechain. I think I've got a Hass effect delay. So if you don't know about the Hass effect, what happens is if I play this shaker without it on it, it's almost right down the middle. It's almost mono. Now this delay, what it does is it delays the audio from, so it basically hits the right side of your speakers a little bit later than the left side, just a tiny amount. But what that does is it generates almost an echo effect in your brain, so your brain perceives it as though it's two different sources. So it basically pushes things to the side like that, so you don't need to duplicate and switch or anything like that. So if I add this, if I turn it off and on, this is what it does. So off and then on. And by doing that again, if I'm pushing them out to the side, like I said before, it's important that things aren't playing over each other. If I'm pushing them out to the side, then that means that all this going on here has got like the middle of the like the stereo field to play with, so they're not fighting over each other. Whereas if I had that turned off, that would just be fighting with all this, which is not what you want. Okay, so that's the percussion. Hi-hats, not much to say about the hi-hats really. Just, yeah, I mean they're just like basic hi-hats. These are just little tippy tappers. If I play these, yeah, with hi-hats you can kind of play around with it. These are useful to kind of create some stereo interest. So if you have the main hat hitting, you can always have hi-hats kind of ticking off to the side to keep it interesting. And that was the thought process behind having two sets of closed hats kind of playing off each other. And then you got the ride cymbals. Ride cymbals just a sample which is automated to go up and towards the end, I think. Yeah, that's it really. Okay, so the vocals, I specifically wanted a high-pitched vocal in the build-up to the drop, and that's just to create a juxtaposition between the build-up and the drop. You don't want any low end in the build-up, because if you've got a track and the build-up has a lot of low end, imagine say you just have the bass line playing in the build-up, when it comes to the drop, no one's asked, because you're just giving them the same as they've already got. The whole idea of a build-up is to kind of gives people a sense of anticipation and climax, and you do that by getting rid of all the low end. I mean, usually there are other ways of doing it, but that's the main way. And so I specifically sought out to have a high pitched vocal in the build up, so that when it drops, it's just the bass line, and you're just like, you know, filled with low end. So that's why I chose this sample. It's just from a Vengeance pack, isn't everything. And yeah, it just loops, and then it's got some kind of effects in the background, which I'll show you now.
I love it to the bone. 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 Everybody feel it come around with the.
So you'll notice that all this reverb and delay that builds up just towards the drop, just before when this vocal kicks in here, it's all removed, and that's just done through automation. So the bone, yeah, so this bone sample gets sent to some returns, bone delay and bone reverb. Obviously I've used returns so that I can keep the original sample like in the mix nice and clean, doesn't get washed out with dry and wet. And the bone delay, you'll see all the automation builds up from the build up here all the way, and then just before the drop, or just as the everybody vocal sample comes in, it's all removed. And that's just so that like you get that kind of powerful sample hitting before the drop. And it's the same with the reverb. Of course, I add a tiny bit of reverb just so that the mix isn't completely dry. It's just nice to have like a tiny bit. Yeah, and then the delay is just Ableton stock delay with a bit of EQ. The smaller this EQ here is literally just to remove an annoying frequency, and the limiter is because the essentially set the echo feedback. Do I set it above? I think I do. Let me check. Because the feedback's so high, it kind of creates a very like a kind of a loop, and I don't want it to be too overpowering, so I just set a limiter because the feedback almost overbears the vocal, which you don't want. So the limiter just kind of reduces a bit of the volume. So if I play this now, you see what the limiter's doing. Let's play that.
Everybody feel it come around with the.
Yeah, it's just kind of stopping that reverb from just going too much into the mix. And then the other delay. Now the reverb is a little plate by Sound Toys. It's a great little plug-in, this, and yeah, it's just nice and easy. Very few settings, which sometimes you want. You just want to add a quick reverb and then just kind of have that building up. This is just the mix that goes up. Yeah, mix goes up then down. That's it. Now the reason this is in a group is because when it builds up in the interlude, now with this echo, this kind of ping pong echo, which I use quite a lot, if you just listen to this, kind of bounces, and it's a 8th dotted, if I remember. Yeah, 8th dotted, tiny offset. Now I kind of like the way that rhythmically that sounds nice. That's why I use it a lot in a lot of my tracks. Now I've sent this to a send just so that it's just the bone part of the vocal that hits the reverb, so you just get bone, 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 bone bouncing. And I quite like that, and I thought I could use that in the build-up. So what I've done is I've thrown the bone sample into a simpler and then played it on the keyboard. So it goes bone, bone, but so it's basically replicating what the delay's doing, but the actual sample's doing it, so it's not a delay. So if I play this, add that to click. So it's giving you that kind of rhythmic thing. But the problem is, I wanted it to loop as it's building up into the drop. So if you listen to it, Well, the problem with that is I couldn't be bothered figuring out like the maths of how long the loop's meant to be for like thirds and stuff. I mean, there are websites to do that, and you can just kind of figure out yourself. But one of the easier ways is to use the consolidation tool in Ableton. So what I did was, if I get the bone, created a new track here, get the bone part, and then if I know where it's got to hit, so where is it? It's about third there, isn't it? It's about there. And then if I just duplicate that or copy it, just make sure it's the right size. So if I play this now with the metronome, try it again. And that's right. So I know that is the exact correct length. Now, this is obviously a bigger sample, even if a tiny amount. This sample's slightly bigger. When I drag this into simpler, if I consolidate this now, just this size, and then drag this into the simpler, if I loop this, it is the exact size that I want for it to go bone, 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 bone. So you'll notice here, it's just one long MIDI note. And then the advantage of that is when I loop it, it will just stay the correct size. So if I just listen to this. So it's the right size, but obviously I want it to shorten as it gets closer to the build-up. So I've just reduced the length of the loop to slowly kind of go down towards. And then you've probably heard a little bit of transposition going on. It's just 6 semitones up as it's going up. That's it. And have I got, yeah, probably, yeah, I've got a little bit of high pass, just again, as we were talking before about how you want no low end in the build up. So just a little high pass to kind of improve that juxtaposition between the build up and the drop. So that's the bone sample. Okay, then there's the vocal chops. Now these were not easy. They took a long time of just arduous trial and error, trying to get something to sound decent. But when you play them with the drums, I'm really happy with how they came out. Come around with the rhythm, everybody feel it, come around with the rhythm. Yeah, now I chose this sample again. I wanted a sample that was lower than the build-up vocals, and I came across this guy. Really liked the sound of his voice, and I liked the kind of rhythm in everything he was saying. So I chose this, and the vocal is actually quite a long verse. If I just kind of play this out. Everybody feel it, come around with the rhythm, it's a sound, everybody get down when we give it to you. It's quite a long one, and I just kind of picked out bits that I liked and just auditioned different things, tried them along with the drums, and I just kind of just looped the drums with the vocals over and over again until I got something I was happy with. And yeah, I'm really happy with how they came out. There's no effects on them though. It's just they're just vocal chops, just getting cut up at the right time. Now the reverse reverb, I'm quite a proponent of reverse reverb. I really enjoy kind of I enjoy introducing things into the mix as much as I can. It's quite difficult with tech tunes because they're quite dry overall. There's not much reverb going on most of the time, so it's hard to get right, but I do prefer to use them where possible. It's one of those things where you feel like it's a bit of a ball ache to do them, to be honest, but I really do think the rewards kind of outweigh the effort. So I'll quickly show you how I do reverse reverbs if you don't know how. So I'm going to create a new audio track, call it reverse. Now you say, set this to resampling here. So what that does is when you hit record, it resamples whatever it is coming through the door. So say that's the part that I want to reverse reverb. I will choose my reverb. Now you can use Ableton stock reverb if you want. It's just I'm using Valhalla because I've got presets on this. So I'll use here's one I made earlier, preset. Kind of a low. You don't want too much high end on it. Not like the low cut. Full mix, and you want the delay depending on how long you want the reverse verb. You want the delay to kind of line up with that. It's not the biggest thing because you can just, if it's too long, you can just fade it. So just make sure it's long enough rather than depending on how short it is. So I'm just going to delete that. I'm going to turn these off so they don't get in the way of the verb, because this is the only bit that I want to be reverbed. And then you solo it. Now this group doesn't have any processing on it, but if it did, you would need to turn off the processing for the group, otherwise that will be sent into the reverb, because again this resampling just records whatever you hear through the door. So if you have like a sidechain on the vocals, you'll hear that on the reverse verb, and you don't want that. So you would turn off, but there's nothing on this one, so we move. Okay, and then you set this to record. So you solo whichever channel it is you have the reverb on, and then you set on record whichever audio channel you want the reverse or the reverb recorded to. So let's say it starts about there. So set it to wherever you want it to start, so just before the audio, and then click record. Stop. Okay, there it is. Now you kind of want this to snap to grid because you want to be able to move it properly, because if when you reverse this, which I will now, you want to make sure it's movable to the grid that you've set. So just kind of shorten it to that, and then click R to reverse, and then you want this lining up with the end of this. And there you go, that's your reverse reverb. Let's see what that sounds like. Oh, actually, delete that. Okay, there we go. There you go, that's your reverb. You'd have to clean up kind of that part of it. That's it, nice and easy. And just fade in however long you want this reverb. Blah blah blah. The only other thing is, because this is only a very small vocal chop, it's tiny, it's not that big a deal. But if you have larger, more complicated audio, so say something that big, a couple of words, you'll want to reverse that before applying reverb to it. So that's because if you apply the reverb and then you reverse it, the vocals will be backwards. It's not that big a deal if it's just a vocal chop, but if it's something more complicated, it would be wise to reverse it first before applying the reverb, and then when you reverse the reverb, the vocals will be the right way around. Okay, that's reverse reverb. Anything else on this? No, couple of uhs. I love my uhs. I love little vocals. Yeah, they're just on kind of drops and stuff. But yeah, that's the vocals, isn't it? Okay, so next we've got the synth and the sounds. So the synth, this is just something small to add to both drops. So I think sometimes, depending on the track, sometimes it can be a little bit boring just having the same drop again and again and again. So I like to, in my tracks, I like to kind of build up to the last drop, like kind of like a final boss. So after the first drop, it'll just be a normal one, and then the middle drop will have something else, and then the third drop will have like something kind of big to build up to. So on the middle drop, you've got this, and that's just a patch from Deceiver Volume 2, is it? Yep, Deceiver Volume 2. I didn't do much to that, to be honest. I don't think. I think I caned the side chain because I like to have that kind of pumping vibe. So if I turn the side chain off and on, oh yeah, so I added, I didn't add, but I kind of used a MIDI file. So sounds pretty good, but with a nice pumping side chain, it comes out a little bit more kind of heavy and groovy. Yeah, and that just really adds to the second drop. Like if you listen to the second drop with and without this synth, and then add the synth, just fucking sick in it, to be honest. So then the drop synth, I did do something kind of cool with this. So with the drop synth, again, this is just another patch from Deceiver. Oh no, it's not. It's from some Unison. Don't even know where I got that from, but yeah. So I quite liked with this patch. I quite liked the way it kind of uses an LFO on the cutoff, a low frequency oscillator, which kind of gives it this stuttering effect. And so it sounds like this by itself. I like that, but I thought it would be kind of cool to, don't know, add a kind of strange, trippy element to it towards the end. So what I used was Lfo Tool, which kind of, so it basically, I quite liked the way the cutoff LFO was used on this patch, but I wanted to kind of amplify it, so I kind of transferred the cutoff kind of responsibility from Serum into Lfo Tool using automation. By doing that, you get this kind of weird trippy vibe of it moving into kind of the center of the mix. So I'll show you what I mean. Without Lfo Tool, it does. Now what I've done is, again, to transfer the LFO from Serum into Lfo Tool, I've removed the cutoff from the patch using automation. So here, this kind of, so without Lfo Tool, this is what the patch does. And I've used, I used sidechain on this using Kickstart, and then as it gets to the Lfo tool, I remove the sidechain because there's no need to have it, because Lfo Tool's sidechaining it while I'm using it. So with Lfo Tool on, it kind of does, actually I'll do it without everything else, so just play it by itself. And then if I add Lfo Tool, so Lfo Tool, you can see the depth is 0 and it increases slowly to 100, while the cutoff of the patch is also decreasing at the same time, roughly. I mean, I've kind of tweaked it so it sounds cool, but if you look, where is it? The Lfo Tool depth pretty much synchronized with the cutoff of Serum. So if I play that, and it gives you this kind of cool, trippy, whatever. I don't know. I thought it sounded cool, so I kept it in. So that's the synth. Then we've got the sounds. Now the sound. Nope, sorry, we've got the siren. Now it's kind of funny about the siren because I wanted stuff to add to the mix because I just wanted to keep it interesting, and I live in a city centre and I hear police sirens all the time, all the fucking time, because I don't know, I think there's a police station nearby, and I hear ambulances as well because there's a hospital up the road. So I sat there thinking, what can I add to this to kind of give it something extra? And I heard a police car go past, and I thought, you know what, that'd be pretty cool. I'll put a police siren on the first drop, and that's what I did. And so if you hear the first drop, there's a police siren on it. This one. And so it's one of those things where if it goes, you don't realise it's not there until it's gone. So if I play the drop now without the siren,
Everybody feel it come around with the
and then put it back on,
Everybody feel it come around with the
it's one of those elements that just adds. And then because I put that siren in, I thought, you know what, this is kind of a good theme to have with the track. So yeah, I mean, the tune was actually originally called Bone, as you can see in the top left. The project's called Bone Final. And then halfway through, I thought, you know what, fuck it, let's put some sirens in. So it got turned into Bone Siren. And then throughout the track, I've just got different elements of sirens. So like in the build-up, there's a little Doppler of it going left to right, this bit. And I kind of liked it. It gives you this kind of urban vibe to the track. And then there's some kind of little, just kind of cutty bits. Yeah, and they're just all the way through the track. And then there's another siren. I think that's in the sound section, which we'll go to the sound section now. So with the sound section, there's another siren, which is just... And I originally had that for the build-up, essentially, because it's a nice sound to pitch up. It sounds good when you pitch it up, so... And it adds to the build-up. Now with this one, there was quite a lot of low end on this, so I had to cut a lot of this out. As we spoke about before, you don't want any low end in the build-up, or you don't want, in this track anyway, you don't want any low end in the build-up, so I had to remove all the low end before using it. But it does sound pretty cool as it builds up. And then the next thing, this is this is something I just came across in my head. If anyone's played GTA or GTA 1, right, there's a radio chatter that they use, and it's actually a piece of Foley from a very old Hollywood sample CD called Samples for Hollywood Volume 11 or something. And I spent years trying to track this down, trying to find out where it came from, because there's a police radio chatter sample, and they say find George K or 5 George K, and it's in everything. It's in films all around, just everything. Like, so any film you've heard from, say, 1985 or 1990 straight up to 2010, they have this 5 George K radio chatter in it. And and it's in GTA as well. And I finally found this sample off this CD in off this sample CD from Hollywood from like 1980s, and I found it, and I was like, I have to put this into a track because it's like been a hobby to try and find it. So this sample you will have heard everywhere. Yeah, so I just, because I found it and I was making a tune with sirens in, I was like, I'm putting this radio chatter in. So I found a place to put this in. You shouldn't really do that. You shouldn't put stuff in just for the sake of it, but you know. So this sounds bus, it's a bit of a weird one. People, like, it's a strange stem to have, to be honest, but I always kind of get paranoid that my tracks don't have enough going on. So I'll try and add small elements just to kind of keep your ears interested. So throughout this, there's just tiny little sweeps and just bits and bobs going off throughout the track. And they just sound like nonsense by themselves. It just sounds like complete nonsense. But when you put it together, it just adds to everything else.
Everybody feel it come around with the
That's that. There's something missing from that. I've turned some of the vocals off, haven't I? It's that one. Anyway, yeah, so that's these sounds. Okay, so the effects. I fucking love my effects most of the time. I love the transitions. Like I said before about reverse verbs, like I love bringing things in and dropping them out. But having said that, this is a really kind of dry tech house tune, so there isn't much going on with this one. But the effects is essentially anything in the high end, and transitions and cymbals, things like that, and like sweeps. So there's quite a lot of sweeps here, and crash cymbals, things like that, and then uplifters, and then atmosphere. Now atmosphere is something that, God, I picked this up a long time ago, and like kind of the EDM days when, you know, tunes were like so loud and there was loads going on. But I think this is a really good kind of tip, or like, you know, kind of useful thing to add. Just a tiny amount of noise. It's almost just above dither, really. Just something to have that like kind of bass volume of something going on all the time. So the place, I don't know. I think humans can pick up when something is completely empty, when there's very little going on. And this is just kind of like a cheat sheet of like how to just make sure there's always something, even ever so slightly, happening. Now, back when it was all EDM, they used to just have like a noise, like white noise, just like sidechained white noise, but that's a bit shit, I think. So I usually have kind of like vinyl crackles or something like that just on in the background all the time. So this one is, yeah, it's going to turn up because you probably can't hear it. And it's literally that all the way through, and it just helps to kind of just literally just has something in the background all the time. I think I've got another one here for the interest. What does this do? I can't even remember what this is. Oh, that's a bit louder. And obviously the problem with this is you've got to be careful, because as you can hear, it's borderline just noise. So you can see there how much space is being taken up in the frequency spectrum there. It's just a lot, and obviously that can build up. So you've got to be careful how you use it. You've got to have the volume very low, because it'll just add noise to your mix if you're not careful. Uplifters, not much to say there really. Crash cymbals. Now these are something as well which I use quite a lot. They're like suck noises. Now these are just the same one, just pan left and right, so they'd be slightly, as you think you can see, yeah, there's a delay here. Now this is, as I spoke of before about the Hass effect on me percussion, this is exactly the same thing. I've just done it differently, just 4 seconds delay on the left hand side. I'm not sure why I didn't just use span delay, the Voxengo delay plugin for this. Probably a copy and paste job for an older project. Right, so we'll listen to these. I quite like how they work in the mix. If I play these, if I turn them up just so you can hear what they're doing a bit more, play it. I just like the way it kind of pushes the track forward. So I do use those quite a lot. Yeah, I use them in most of my tracks, to be honest. They're not always at the exact same setup, but I do like having those very small micro sweeps. I think I've got them up here as well, somewhere. Micro sweep, yeah, there's loads of micro sweeps here as well. These should really be down in the effects bus. I don't know why they're in the sounds one, but you know. And what else have I got in here? There's not much else really. Just as you can see, Kane Evolution of Sound, Zen World. He's the guy. Does some great work with samples and patches. Yeah, that's it really. On the effects bus, there's not much going on. Small side chain, a little bit. It's a bit lazy doing that, to be honest. Just side chaining it all, but it's just easier. And then just an EQ, just none of that taking up space. And then the low effects. It's a bit, I mean, I can't, if someone asks me why I have low effects in a different like group, or you know, I'd output this as a different stem. I don't know. I started doing it, and then I've just kind of got into the habit of having low effects in a different bus. Don't need to really, because there's very little going on. I could just have this up. Don't know. I think maybe because I like to EQ the effect. I like to EQ everything, probably a bit too much. So if I've got low effects, obviously it'll be EQ'd a bit differently. Like you can have this a little bit lower down. But I do quite like having whenever there's like the kick stops, I always have some kind of introduction. As I said before, I quite like transitions. So whenever the kick stops, I'll have like a sine sub drop or something. So if I just play this. It's quite a lot. I mean, to be fair, I'm using 3 is probably a bit too much, to be honest, overkill. But so I put this in the context of the track. Now, if I turn that off and play, you can tell, and also this is the kind of stuff that you need for when you play it in clubs. So whenever you play it in clubs, you'll notice when there's no introduction into the build up. So that's what that's for. That's pretty much it now. On the master, this is something that I would really recommend for people. So when most people, I think like everyone mixes on the fly. If they say they're not mixing on the fly, they're fucking lying. Everyone mixes on the fly. So you want to make sure that you're not clipping, but you also want to make sure that you have 6 dB of headroom for when you output to a master. So if you have a utility on the master and you set it to 6 dB, while you're mixing on the go, you will know straight away if you're going above minus 6 dB, which is what you want. You know, most people, when you have a master, they always say make sure it's at minus 6 decibels, so you've got enough headroom. So they've got enough headroom to master the track. So if you set your utility to 6 dB, that will mean the channel of the master will be, the highest you can go is minus 6 dB, because when you turn that off, you'll be at so if I play, say, the drop. That's pretty low anyway, but let's have a go. Let's go a bit higher up. Something a bit more. It's the drop. It's this bit. I mean, this track's really quiet anyway, so I don't need it, but it's good practice anyway. If you have this at +6, when you start going over 0 dB, it will go red, and you'll see in the indicator there that you're clipping or going above 0. And it's a good indicator to have, because if you have it at 0 and you want it to be at -6, it won't show you that you're going above -6, because it only shows that you're going above 0. So if you have the utility set at 6 dB, it will show 0 when it's -6, if you get me. And then when you send it to master, you just remove the utility, and then it's all good to go at -6 dB of headroom. So then I've got a reference plugin. and this is just, I'll just use a track for reference, and then use that to kind of mix everything down. Then I use Voxengo Span. I don't know why I use this plugin to do my mastering. I just do. It's just yeah. So when I'm mixing down and mastering my track, I always have Voxengo Span on. Don't know why. FabFilter's a really good plugin as well, but it's just kind of habit. And then after that is the WM meter. This is just so when I am mixing down, I know the LUFS. And that's that. So yeah, that's the end of the walkthrough. I hope you had some kind of cool information there. If you've got any other questions, or you want to ask me any questions about the video, just hit me up on Instagram, Grenno Music. Yeah, see you in the next video, hopefully.
Round rhythm with the round with the round with the rhythm. Come around with the rhythm. Everybody feel it, come around with the rhythm.